Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today, inshallah, we're going to complete chapter 2, and we'll start in chapter 3. As you know, that in the last class, we discussed the differences between the nominal GDP and real GDP, as well as how to calculate the nominal and real GDP, as well as the GDP deflator, right? Today, as I mentioned, that we are going to complete the something related to chapter 2, and then we will start in chapter 3. As you see, that as you know, that the real GDP calculates or computes the aggregate output by using what? The fixed prices or the current prices? The real GDP. Yes, exactly. But the nominal GDP computes the aggregate income or the aggregate output by using what? By using the current prices. So, let's go to the GDP and social welfare. As you know, that when we talk about the GDP, we are talking about the gross or the all outputs produced in a given period of time, right? But we are not talking about the distribution of this income or this output. We are not talking about the impacts of this output on the social welfare. Sometimes, if the economy or the social situation improved, this will improve the welfare association, the welfare situation for the people, right? So suppose that the crimes rate in the society declined. In this case, what would happen? The social welfare would increase, but the GDP are not talking about the impact of the welfare on the economy. So the GDP calculation has some problems. So it ignores the impact of social welfare. It ignores the talking about the distribution of this output. Sometimes or maybe 70% out of this output will go to a group of 10% of the community. So it doesn't talk about the distribution of income. What about the so as you see, the GDP has related to the social welfare. Society is better off when the crime decreases. However, a decrease in the crime is not reflected in the GDP, right? So the GDP ignores the crimes in the community. What else? An increase in the leisure. Leisure means الراحة وقت الفراغ is an increase in social welfare, but not counted in GDP. So the social welfare is not reflected in the GDP. What else? The production of or the activities are implemented by your mother at home. It's part of the production, but it's not reflected in the GDP. So sometimes part or different kinds of activities are not reflected in the GDP. So it has a problem. As you know, that if your mother provides different services at home, right? So all of these services provided by your mother to her children, to her kids, are not reflected in the GDP. So actually it has to be reflected to be fair, right? So as you see in the third point, non-market and household activities, الأنشطة اللي بتقوم بتعملها أمك في البيت ما بتنحسبش ضمن GDP. So activities are not counted in the GDP even though they amount of the real production. What else? GDP, as I mentioned, has nothing to say about the distribution of output, right? So it doesn't talk about the distribution of income and outputs in the community, right? So إذا في عندنا مجموعة مشاكل في الجي دي بي، وإن كان هو كويس، بعطي مؤشر it's a good indicator for the health of the economy, but it has or it ignores something related to the social welfare, the crimes of the economy, the environment, pollution, or the pollution of the environment and the community. It ignores the distribution of income and outputs in the economy, right? So, to be fair, it has to consider these issues, right? عشان هيك في ناس قالوا انه الجي دي بي مش مؤشر كويس للايكونومي، لانه اهمل الحاجات هاي، اهمل اللي هو توزيع الدخل، اهمل the activities implemented by the households or something like this. Okay? Let's go to another thing, which is the underground economy.
Black market.
Yes, the black market. باختصار ال underground economy هو الاقتصاد السري. عمليا الأنشطة بتصير وفي عندنا real production بس ما بتتسجلش في الجي دي بي. And we have an example which is the tax evasion. تهرب الضريبي. عمليا الأنشطة تنفذ اللي هو وفي عندي actual production but it's not registered in the GDP. So the GDP calculation does not include everything in the economy. Sometimes we have some actions, some activities, some productions implemented already actually, but it's not entered in the GDP calculation, right? Like as you see, the tax evasions. So as you see, the underground economy means the اقتصاد السري as the part of an economy in which the transactions take place. المبادلات والمعاملات بتصير حقيقة and in which income is generated actually, right? But that is unreported and therefore not counted in the GDP, right? So عمليا في أنشطة بتصير وفي income generated, but unfortunately it's not counted or calculated in the GDP. So some of the economic activities are not unreported in the economy or in the GDP when we calculate it, right? And we have an example which is the tax evasions. The tax evasions, the economic activities are implemented actually but not reported in the GDP calculation, right? So as you see, the tax evasions is usually thought to be the major incentive for people to practice in the underground economy. Where the black market, as your classmate explained, that it's one of the examples for the underground economy, right? Okay. We have the last term related to the GDP, which is a gross national income. A gross national income. To make a comparison between the economic situation between different countries. Like suppose that I would like to do a comparison between the American economy and the UK economy. I have to use a unique indicator to do a comparison. In general, they use the gross national income as an indicator to do a comparison between the economic situation in these countries. So suppose, so in this case, we have to what? To convert, as you see, the UK used what? The pound to for their transactions. بيستخدموا الباوند الجنيه الاسترليني مظبوط. In the US, they used the US dollar, right? Or suppose in Israel, suppose that we are going to do a comparison between the Israeli economy and the UK economy. As you know that in the Israeli economy, they use shekel, a new Israeli shekel, for their transactions, for their income, for their outputs. to calculate the GDP. In the UK, they use a pound. So to do a comparison between the UK economy and the Israeli economy, we have to use a unique measure tool to do a comparison. It's called the GNI, Gross National Income. In this case, we have to convert the new Israeli shekel to US dollar, and also to convert for the UK pound to US dollar. In this case, suppose that in the Israeli economy, we converted the aggregate, the GDP, or the value of output to US dollar, from shekel to US dollar. Suppose a new Israeli shekel equals, or 1 US dollar equals how much? How many dollars?
3.75.
3.7 a new Israeli shekel, right? And suppose the total output or income, the aggregate, the gross income, the gross national income for for Israeli, suppose it was 700,000 shekels, right? And for the UK, 1 USD equals how many pounds? 0.7. Suppose this is UK pound, and suppose that the GDP, or the gross national income for the UK, in the UK, suppose it was 7,000 pounds. To do a comparison, million. To do a comparison between the economy, the situation, the Israeli economy and the UK economy, we have to use a unique measure. So we have to convert this amount to US dollar, right? And this to US dollar, and we have to decide which is better, the Israeli economy or the UK economy, right? So let's come back to the definition of the gross national income. So as you see, to make a comparison of GNP between countries, the currency exchange rate must be taken into account. أسعار الصرف، إنه بنحول من شيكل لدولار، من UK pound لدولار. So the gross national income is a measure used to make what? International comparisons of output. GNI is GNP converted into dollar, into US dollar, using an average of currency exchange rate over several years adjusted for the rate of inflation. عطول بنعمل exchange rate ما بين الشيكل للدولار والUK pound للدولار وبنشوف which is better, right? So we have another term, or the last term, which is the gross national income per capita. متوسط نصيب الفرد من إجمالي الدخل القومي، عبارة عن GNI الجروس ناشونال انكم over population. يعني suppose إنه الجروس ناشونال انكم GNI equals $1,000 million, $1,000 or $1,000 million, and the number of population is 2 million US dollar, right? And the number of population is 2 million. Population 2 million. In this case, the per capita or the GNI per capita means متوسط نصيب الفرد من GNI. So in this case, GNI, gross national income per capita, equals what? The gross national income over the population. GNI over the population. 1,000 over 2, $500 per capita. This is the per capita income for the peer person or peer person in the economy, right? Let's start or begin with chapter 3, which is the long run and short run concerns, includes the growth, productivity, unemployment, and inflation. So, as you know that the ideal economy includes the low or the best or the optimal or the ideal economy which has a low unemployment rate, low inflation, and high growth rate. صح؟ أفضل اقتصاد بدنا إياه low, the economy with low inflation rate, معدل تضخم متدني, low unemployment rate, and high growth rate. So, as you see, an ideal economy is one in which there is rapid growth of output per worker, low unemployment, and low inflation rate, right? Unfortunately, the economists or the economics are not always in this ideal state. خلينا نشوف the growth theory, نظرية النمو. There are number, or the growth theory studies the factors that affect the average growth rate of output in the economy. بدنا نشوف العوامل اللي بتأثر في النمو. We have many factors affect the growth rate in the economy. Number one, the number of workers. If the number of workers increased, this leads to increasing output or output growth, right? This is the first factor affect the growth in the economy or the growth of outputs. What else? We can add more machines, right? Okay, but here when we talk about the growth theory, we're talking about supply, not demand, right? So the major question is, how could we increase the aggregate output? We can add more workers, we can add more machines, we can improve the quality or the productivity of workers and the productivity of machines for sure. So we have 4 main factors or 5 main factors affect the growth of outputs. Number one, we can add more workers, we can add more machines, we can increase the length of the working hours, or yes, the work week means the working hours per, yes. Okay, but if we reach the full capacity or the capacity utilization or the maximum capacity, in this case, any addition of workers would lead to a reduction in the output. But before the full employment, if we add more workers, this leads to increasing the aggregate output, right? But after the full employment, exactly, yes, and increasing the outputs on workers leads to a reduction, sometimes to a reduction of the aggregate output. So we can increase the number of hours that the workers work, as well as we can increase the quality or the productivity of workers and the productivity of machines or technology, right? Let's go to, yes. Yes. Okay, when we talk about increasing machines, for sure, we're talking about the capital, increasing capital, right, as investment. So, how could we calculate the labor productivity? إنتاجية العامل شو بتساوي؟ As you see in this formula, the labor productivity إنتاجية العامل equals what? The total output or the real GDP over the total worker hours. على عدد ساعات العمل. قديش بننتج على عدد ساعات العمل? This is what the labor productivity, right? Let's come back to some definitions that we have studied in chapter 1. The business cycle. What's the business cycle? Exactly, it's the short down, ups and downs in the economic activity. And when we talk about the business cycle, as you know, we were talking about expansion and recession or contraction in the economic activity. Just to remind you, this is the business cycle. Right? This is the peak. Peak, trough, peak. From peak to trough, we have what? A recession, exactly, which is a contraction. During the peak, or during this period, from peak to trough, the unemployment rate would increase, and the employment would increase. So, as you see, this is a recession or a contraction period. In this case, or in this period, there will be a low demand on workers. So we have an excess supply of labor or high unemployment rate, right? Let's go to the recession. As you know, the recession is a period where the output طبعا declined والunemployment بيزيد, increased. مظبوط ولا لا? So let's go to the definition here. The recession is roughly a period in which real GDP declines. As you see, during the recession here, the output declined, while unemployment increased. So in this case, we have a low or a declining in labor demand in this period, right? Or in this stage. تمام؟ شو عندي كمان بس؟ Yes. Sorry? Here. As you see, during the recession, a recession is from the peak to trough. We have what? A contraction in the economy. We have a high unemployment rate, the low outputs, right? Okay? Is there a problem? No, just to remind you for these concepts. نعم. As you see, or the capacity for the consumers or the demand is low. In this case, the business are obliged to close. So if you remember that the Keynesians or the Mr. Keynes advised the government to stimulate the economy by what? By stimulating the aggregate demand, or by increasing, exactly Muhammad, by increasing its spending and reduce the taxes in order to stimulate the economy or to get rid of unemployment, right? This is the solution that has been raised by Mr. Keynes. What about the depression? Depression, as we mentioned, 2 consecutive quarters or a deep recession becomes what? A depression. كساد مرحلتين متتاليتين من اللي هو الهاي بيصير عندنا depression, or a prolonged and deep recession becomes a depression. What else? The capacity utilization rate بسموه معدل المستخدم من الطاقة. Suppose that we have in the Palestinian economy, the capacity utilization is suppose we have a 1,000 worker. If we used 800 workers, in this case, we used how much? 80% out of our capacity. إذا استخدمنا 1000 بيكون في وين إحنا full capacity utilization. Suppose إنه in an economy we have 1,000 workers, and this economy used only 700 workers. قديش عندنا capacity utilization rate? Exactly. So the capacity utilization rate equals 700 over 1,000 times 100 equals 70%. Right? هذا ايش؟ اسمه الكاباسيتي يوتيلايزيشن ريت وهو الجزء المستغل من الطاقة تبعتنا. Right? If we use more workers, in this case the capacity utilization rate would increase. Right? Okay. Okay.
Is it a must that we use the whole capacity rate?
If we used more workers or more factors production, our capacity utilization would increase, right? And it would be better for us to use more resources.
Is it a must?
If we are talking about the economic growth, about the healthy of the economy, it's okay. Yes, it's obligatory. We have to use more resources, right? يعني لازم الأصل إن إحنا نستخدم طاقات أعلى. Okay. Okay. Let's go to the definition or the differences between employed people and unemployed people. هلا في تعريف للناس اللي بيشتغلوا وفي ناس اللي عاطلين عن العمل. So let's go to distinguish between the unemployed and employed people. Employed, we have three main conditions for the people to be classified as employed. في عندي ثلاث شروط عشان يكونوا هذول مصنفين ضمن انهم بيشتغلوا. Number one, as you see, the people who works for pay, اللي بندفع له أجر, and either for someone else or in his or her own business for 1 or more hours per week. واحد بندفع له أجر وبيشتغل ساعة أو أكثر في وين؟ في on his own business or her own business, اللي بيشتغل ساعة أو أكثر في وين؟ في شغله في الأسبوع. تمام؟ هذا يصنف is classified as employed. What else? The people who works without pay for 15 or more hours per week in a family enterprise. واحد بندفعلوش أجر بس بيشتغل 15 ساعة أو أكثر في البزنس تبع العيلة. هذا بيسموه employed. What else? The people who has a job but has been temporarily absent with or without pay. واحد بيشتغل أصلا بس غايب عن الشغل ماخذ إجازة. تمام؟ هذا بيسموه employed. Right? So what about the unemployed people or the unemployed persons? The unemployed persons is, or the unemployed person is a person 16 years old or more who is not working. يعني بدنا نصنف اللي هم الناس اللي unemployed يصنفوا أول شيء 15 years old or more and they are not working, is available for work, يعني عنده قدرة على العمل, and has made the specific efforts to find work during the previous 4 weeks but not found work. يعني لازم يكون 16 years old or more, he is available for work, he searched for a job during the last 4 weeks and he didn't find. لا انتوا بسموكم discouraged workers. جاي لهذا المصطلح. او بسموه اللي بيطلعوكم برا هذول. لا مش discouraged worker. انتوا as a student you are not in the labor force. انتوا برا القوى العاملة لانه ما بتبحثوش عن شغل. Yes, not available for work. You didn't you don't search for a job, so you are not unemployed. You are not unemployed exactly. So
بيشتغلوش بيعدوا الستودنت معهم فوق ال 16.
لا no. You are not in the labor force. جاي للمصطلح هذا هلقيت. ما بيعدوكم حتى بيعدوكم برا الليبر فورس. يعني مش من ضمن القوى العاملة. تمام؟ طيب. A person who is not looking for work. الناس اللي بدوروش على الشغل. Either because he or she does not want a job or has given up is not in the labor force. زي حالاتكم لا بدور على الشغل. مزبوط؟ انتوا 16 years old or more but you don't search or look for a job, so you are not in the labor force. Okay, but later on you are, inshallah, you will be active in the economy. Okay, let's go to calculate the labor force, labor force participation rate, the unemployment rate, and employment rate, right? So as you see in these formulas, the labor force equals what? The number of people who are employed plus unemployed. Yes, population over 16 years old, right? And they have to search for a job. And okay, so they include, or the labor force includes the people who is employed plus unemployed, right? So suppose in the economy we have the people who are 16 years old and more, some of them, 1,000 people are employed and 700 are unemployed. In this case, the labor force equals how much? Unemployed plus employed, or employed plus unemployed. So labor force equals 1,700 employed plus unemployed, right? What about the population? العدد السكان. They are two parts. Labor force and not in the labor force. الناس البوبوليشن تبعنا هذا هو ناس في الليبر فورس اللي هم الامبلويد بلس امبلويد، وفي ناس not in the labor force. تمام، انت وغيرك. Unemployment rate equals what? الunemployed over labor force اللي هم employed plus unemployed, right? طيب, labor force participation rate equals the labor force over the population. خلينا ناخد exercises على الفورمولاز هذه. تمام؟ yes.
ايش الفرق بين هذا labor force rate والليبر فورس العادي؟
Labor force is the total number of labor force اللي هم unemployed plus employed, but the labor force participation rate معدل المشاركة في القوى العاملة اللي هم labor force على population. هم جزء من القوى العاملة اللي ما بيشتغلوش. تمام، بس هم جزء they are part of the labor force. لأنه labor force اوكي but طبعا لأنه هو جزء من القوى العاملة اللي دور على شغل ما لقاش. صح؟ طيب, so let's go to take practical exercises related to the calculation of unemployment rate, labor force participation rate, and so on. So as you see, we have the labor force, employed, unemployed. The question is calculate the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate equals what? Unemployed over the summation of employed plus unemployed اللي هم labor force. صح? So equals this amount, or 7.92 over the summation or the number of labor force equals 5.6%. It's easy, I think. It's direct substitution. صح? Yes.
Do we have to put the employed and the employed and the unemployed, or just we can put the labor force?
As you like. As you like. You can write it direct unemployed over the labor force. That's it. Sorry? Yes, it should be given. It should be considered. Yes. طيب, what about the employment rate?
Employed بدل unemployed. Employed على labor.
Exactly. Employment rate employed over labor force.
Times 100.
Okay, times 100. تمام. It's a percentage. طيب. What else? طيب. As you see in this example or this exercise, we have the following information about an economy, which includes the employed, unemployed, not in the labor force. The question is, we have many questions. Number one, calculate the labor force. Yes, yes. Employed plus unemployed. So the labor force, the question is, calculate the labor force, or the people who's in the labor force. As you see, the labor force equals what? Unemployed plus employed. Unemployed plus employed, or employed plus unemployed. Let's go to another question. Refer to the table. The unemployment rate equals what? Exactly. Unemployment rate equals unemployed over labor force times 100. Okay? Refer to the table. The labor force participation rate equals what?
Labor force over.
Yes.
Labor force over
Population equals what? Not in the labor force, exactly. So, as you see, the labor force participation rate equals what? The labor force over the population. We have to calculate the population. Population, labor force plus not in the labor force. Right? So in this case, the labor force, the not in the labor force is given, and the labor force, it's already calculated. So 17,000 plus 4,000 equals how much?
21.
This is what? The number of population, or the population. So the labor force participation rate equals what? The labor force, the labor force, $17,000 workers over 21,000 equals the percentage. It's already given here. 80.9%. Right? Right. The employment rate equals what? Exactly. Employment over the labor force, or 1 minus unemployment rate. صح? 1 minus the unemployment rate. Okay, let's go to this exercise. As you see, the labor force participation rate is given 75%. The total population 16 years old of age and older, which includes, or who includes what? The labor force and not in the labor force, right? And we have the unemployment rate 10%. طب شو بده? This is the question. Let's go to the requirements. Refer to the table. The labor force equals what? We can derive the labor force from the labor force participation rate, right? Or what? Labor force participation rate equals what? The labor force over what? The population. So, yes. So the labor force participation rate is given 0.75 equals the labor force, which is required, over the number of population equals 200 million. So 0.75 times 200, so the labor force equals how much? 150 million people, right? Or workers. What else? When I refer to the table, the total number of people unemployed. Unemployed equals what? This is 150 million. The number of unemployed. The number of people of unemployed, we can derive it from what?
Labor force minus employed.
Minus what? Where is the number of employed here? It's not given. We can derive it from what?
Population minus labor force.
Population that's unemployed.
No. From the unemployment rate. For unemployment rate, as you know, that unemployment rate equals what? Unemployed over the labor force. Unemployment rate is given. The labor force is already calculated, so we can derive the number of unemployed, right? So unemployed, the number of unemployed equals what? Unemployment rate times the labor force.
Labor force minus unemployed. Labor force 150.
So in this case, unemployment equals, or unemployed equal, the unemployment rate equals how much? Unemployment rate 10% times the labor force. The labor force in this case equals what? 150. 15 million. Right? So what's it? It's the number of unemployed. Right? What else? Calculate the employed, the number of people who is employed. Employed equals what? Exactly. The labor force minus the number of unemployed. Sorry? D. Yes, yes. So let's derive the number of people who is employed. Employed. Labor force minus unemployed. People who are employed. Unemployed equals, the labor force equals how much? How many? 150 minus 15. Yes, exactly. 135. This is what? The number of people who is employed. What else? Yes, exactly here. The unemployment rate. Okay.